In-state recruiting's going even better, and Alabama got a big hoops win last night.
You are Locked On Bama, your daily podcast on the Alabama Crimson Tide. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back into Locked On Bama, HSA's radio network. Luke Robinson, that's me. Bama Online's Jimmy Stein, that's him. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. And I love Game Time, and I love all of you telling me when you get Game Time stuff. Also, I want to thank you everydayers for being here every day, and thank you newbies for being here today. You guys are the absolute best. Jimmy, we really wanted to lead in today with some Navy All-American game talk, but this is almost going to be a sad reflection upon high school all-star games in general. Let me tell you something, man. I've gotten to call a lot of ALMS games, a lot of Alabama Mississippi all-star games. They've always been a lot of fun. I've always looked forward to the Under Armour games. I've always looked forward to the Army All-American game, which is now the Navy All-American game. And it just feels like they're done. It just feels like they're done. I tried to watch some of that yesterday, even though Alabama didn't necessarily have a gaggle of people participating. I know Chuck McDonald was there. A couple other guys were there, but it wasn't anything that's like, oh, you must see this if you're an Alabama fan. And it was kind of a hard watch. I mean, I was really with some other guys, and we had a few TVs on, and every time we looked over there to watch that game, it was just like, this doesn't look like, this looks like they got a bunch of high school kids, some of them juniors, and they were like, y'all got about 2.5 days to practice, about an hour a day, and mostly you're just going to be interacting on social media, so go.
Yeah, the recruiting calendar, I think, is what's messed up those games more than anything else. Now they're having to include, because recruiting's done now. When those games are taking place, recruiting's done. So now they're having to include juniors in the game to get people interested, because people want to know where these guys are going to go. Where might they go? It used to be years ago, everybody, I'm sure all the Alabama fans listening, which should be just about all of you, should be Alabama fans, will remember Landon Collins, committing at a national all-star game, and his mom freaking out because his mom wanted him to sign with LSU, and he picked Alabama live on TV. I'm not sure she knew that's where he was going to pick. And but the point is that's when the game sort of reached its peak, its zenith back then. Now all the seniors are already signed. The junior recruiting, yeah, cool. Now you're showing us the best juniors in the country, but their signing day is an entire year away. I think the recruiting calendar has really hurt those games, and interest is down a little bit. I mean, my own interest is down, and I'm a recruiting nut. If my interest is down, that really could mean something, because I used to love these games, and I still like the Alabama Mississippi High School All-Star game, but I'll admit I liked it a lot more back when it was in the summer, and during a time when there wasn't a lot of other football stuff going on, and it engendered a lot of attention then. And I think moving the stuff around and the recruiting calendar being so screwed up has sort of rendered these all-star games to just, there's just less interest. Also, you're putting on a high school all-star game on the same day as NFL playoffs. That's going to swallow up anything. So,
well, that's the thing, Jimmy, is like the NFL is kind of saying, okay, we're going to just take command of January now. We've already owned February and late January. Now we're just going to take over all of January, and we're going to take over Christmas Day. Sorry, NBA, we're going to have NFL games on Christmas Day. And, you can promote Lakers, Boston all you want to, but nobody cares about an NBA game in December. They just don't matter. So that's just the way it's going to be. And that's why I think these things have outlived their usefulness. And again, people may be saying, boy, it's such a strange thing to lead off with. But I think Jimmy and I both, as recruitniks from way back, I mean, I feel quite certain Jimmy did this too. When I was at Alabama back in the early 90s, I mean, late 2000s. Early 90s. I would call the Tuscaloosa News hotline with Cecil Hurt, and it was like 25 cents a call or whatever. I can't remember, something like that. And I didn't care. No, I didn't care because my dad was paying for it ultimately, but I didn't care because I didn't care if I got in trouble, because I wanted to know about recruiting. Nobody else that I was around really gave a dang about recruiting, but I did. I got Forrest Whitaker's, Forrest Davis's.
Jeff
Whitaker's recruiting was less accurate. Actually, it's more accurate than Forrest Davis's.
Yeah. Force Magazine, which I'm sure I got every single one of them that ever existed. I couldn't wait to get it. And it's just, in retrospect, pretty terrible. I mean,
do you still have any? I think
if I do, I couldn't put my hands on it. I have a hard time believing I ever threw it out. I must have.
I think I've still got some, because I thought to myself, one day I'm going to want to look back and see how many of these folks panned out. The problem now is I'll look back and I probably won't even know. It's been so long that these guys probably did pan out, and I've forgotten them in the NFL.
Right.
So,
right.
But
recruiting coverage has changed, and I don't know that people are we're so spoiled by technology and everything else. Recruiting coverage has never been better. It's never been more accurate. It's immense. But it's on the internet, on these fan sites is where the coverage is, and it's never been better, and it's never been more accurate. And I enjoy it almost as much as I ever have. I mean, I know for some people, all the changes in the sport have diminished their interest. Not for me. I'm still really interested. I mean, interested in recruiting beyond Alabama. I mean, just the entire landscape. And boy, there's massive changes coming. I read a great article this morning by Ross Dellinger on Yahoo about the coming changes with revenue sharing next year. And once again, a seismic earthquake size change is coming to college football recruiting starting with the class of 26, and it has to do with revenue sharing and how NIL is changing. But is it really changing? I mean, that's the frontier. That's the Wild Wild West. That's the gray area of NIL is supposed to switch to true NIL, but will it? And that's where
the only way it can is if there is some kind of governing body which will penalize those who abuse the system. Now, there'll be somebody out there who thinks, boy, aren't you being a hypocrite? Alabama abused the system forever. We don't. Yeah, I have no problem saying, yeah, I think Alabama was involved in some stuff. I think everybody was. I'm tired of some of these CBS writers that apparently have a mat on for the SEC now saying, oh, look now, the Big Ten's been winning national championships. There's no SEC team in the national championship again this year, 2 years in a row, because we have true NIL. Isn't that shocking? Doesn't that mean that the SEC cheated all this time? No, it doesn't, but that's another podcast for another day. Now, what I wanted to say too was you brought up the Alabama-Mississippi All-Star game. And again, I understand this is a strange first segment, but y'all bear with us on a Sunday that this is sort of an homage to these things, because I'll never forget. And again, as a member of the AHSA radio network, this means a lot to me. I will never forget when the Alabama-Mississippi All-Star game used to be in the summers. And there was one summer when Wallace Gilberry knocked it out of the park at the Alabama-Mississippi All-Star game. Now, the catch was back then, not necessarily all your great players played in it back then, because they had already moved on to school sometimes. And some of them had already played in too many All-Star games. You could only play in so many or whatever. But Wallace Gilberry tore up Mississippi in his All-Star game. Alabama happened to have a scholarship. And we gave it to him sort of last second, like, here, let's see if Wallace Gilberry turned into anything. It turned out to be Mike Shula's greatest recruiting achievement. I mean, honestly, name another one.
Andre Smith, but
Andre was coming. Andre put on a Bear Bryant hat. He was coming to Bama. I could have been coaching. You could have been coaching.
Gilberry was his best creative move, and the funny thing is, obviously, he ended up being a great player, but he was the quintessential 3-star or less that panned out. I mean, because he didn't have really much recruiting interest at all until the Alabama-Mississippi High School All-Star game, and it was really that week of practice where word got out quickly that, boy, y'all missed one here. This guy's a dude. And he started racking up offers that week of practice. And then the game is sort of when the public got to see it. And then Alabama took him. And that was a heck of a story. And that really can't or won't happen anymore. And in each year, I think the game is diminished because of that. But boy, back then it was a thing. And because of Wallace, I think for the first 4 or 5 years after Wallace Gilberry, the question every summer was who's the new Wallace Gilbert? What unsigned player is going to stand out and end up with a scholarship? And it did happen. By the way, it didn't happen with Alabama, but that did happen in subsequent games. And now, of course, that's a relic of the past.
Boy, I'm going to tell you something else. I just Wikipedia'd him for the heck of it because I was like, we're talking Wallace Gilberry. That's really what all this boils down to is every now and again, I like to remind y'all that Wallace Gilberry was a thing. Y'all might be too young, the ones that are listening to this. But first of all, he had 12 and a half sacks one year. Did you know that?
Yeah. He, as a matter of fact, he's in the school record books for sacks, I think.
No, 12 and a half sacks in the NFL.
Oh, in a single year in the NFL? Yeah, I did know that. Yeah. Well, I knew that he had double-digit sacks at Alabama. I knew he had a long NFL career. He was in the NFL a long time, primarily with the Bengals. And by the way, Wallace is back in Baldwin County, and he is involved in high school coaching. I'm not sure whether he's a certified full-time assistant or one of these volunteer assistants, but he's very prominent, I believe, in Spanish Forks program, even though Wallace played at Baldwin County High School, which is in Bay Minette.
He ran for Alabama's second congressional. He announced his run to represent Alabama's second congressional district in the U.S. House of Representatives as a Republican. Now he didn't win, but he suspended his campaign in early last year. So I mean, as of last year, he was pretty active in politics too. Just anyway, look, I know a lot of y'all are too young for this, but I'm just telling y'all, Wallace Gilberry was a problem in the SEC. He was a dude, and he's the kind of guy that when you talk about in-state guys becoming, legend, he's one of those, if you ask me.
Yeah, Saban, he was one of Saban's best pass rushers.
Yeah.
For a lot of the Saban era, even though Saban only coached him 1 year in 2007, he was a double-digit sack guy. It took a while before there was another double-digit sack guy under Saban.
Yeah, I mean, he was a thing. Y'all look him up. Talking a little TurboTax. This is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes, it's like dealing with piles of paperwork and frustrating forms. Nobody wants to do all that. And then waiting and wondering and worrying if you're going to get any money back or if you're going to get audited or something crazy. Now taxes are easily uploaded into TurboTax Expert, who's matched to your unique tax situation. TurboTax wants to help you. An expert who's backed by the latest technology, which cross-checks millions of data points for 100% accuracy. While they work on your taxes, you get real-time updates on their progress. That's pretty awesome. And you get most money back. You get the most money back. That's guaranteed by Intuit TurboTax. All while you can go about your day. No stressing, no worrying, no waiting. Now, this is taxes and how they should be done. Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now at turbotax.com. Okay, let's start a little in-state recruiting. Here's something interesting that did happen at the Navy All-American game yesterday. Devin Carter, a wide receiver who's a junior, did commit to Auburn. Now you say, why do we care about that? I mean, my first thought was, okay, Devin Carter looks like a pretty good junior player. He looks pretty good. But that is a junior wide receiver. Now, everybody takes a lot of wide receivers. We all know this. But I got to think that may help Alabama with Sedarian Morgan in some sense. And according to an article from Bama Online, where Jimmy works, Alabama is prioritizing in-state a little bit more. I don't think it's due necessarily to being chastised for not prioritizing in-state last year. I don't think that's the case at all. I just think this particular year and years coming up, they've got some dudes that you just can't overlook. Xavier Crowell, Sedarian Morgan, some of those guys. So, don't you think, Jimmy?
Yeah. Well, the coaches could go on the road, and DeBoer went to Alabama first. And that's symbolic as much as it was practical. I think the weather also affected travel a little bit this past week, and he's going to get to go on the road again in January, but this was just the first week of it. And him and his assistants went to see the in-state kids first. And, two things, Luke. Number one, any complaint about Alabama's recruiting last year is a little hollow because it's silly. Alabama right now per on three, the second best recruiting class in the country. The staff should get nothing but lauded for the incredible job they did and shouldn't be criticized in the least. Now, secondly, it is true that Auburn had a ton of success in state and Alabama did not. And that's not really sustainable for Alabama. I mean, Alabama did sign the number 2 class, but going forward, there's no question Alabama needs to do better in state. And I think the staff is highly aware of that. They just got here, and most of them are new to Alabama. Now they've had a full cycle, and I think there'll be a greater priority on the in-state guys. But like Luke said to start out, which is so true, it has to be about dudes. You can't just sign. Alabama could fill up their entire 2026 class today and get 25 commitments from in-state guys today just by accepting the commitments of random players. Now, the problem is 95% of those players wouldn't belong in the SEC, much less at Alabama. You have to sign quality dudes or you can't win. So it's still about evaluation and picking the right guys, regardless of where they're from.
I even asked while I was muted, am I muted? And then I was like, Jimmy can't tell me if I'm muted because I'm muted because I was looking at another screen.
It's starting to learn.
I'm starting. It's all coming together.
It's starting to learn. Joshua, the War Games computer.
Kamarion Johnson is a guy from Muscle Shoals. We talked about him the other day. Auburn has offered him. Bama has offered him. He's barely ranked by anybody. He's going to be ranked by everybody. He's 6'5", 250. This is another guy, again, from Muscle Shoals. And, yeah, he looks like a thing. Alabama and Auburn have really gotten on him as of late. And I feel like that's a guy that's going to be a pretty big deal. Also, Tyson Bacon. This is another defensive lineman. He's committed to Tennessee. Now, he's only a 3-star, again, also only a junior. I suspect, now he's 6'4", 239, which is pretty light for a defensive lineman, but it's not light for a high school junior, so he'll definitely put some weight on. And then DeBoer also stopped by Jackson High School with Landon Duckworth and Jamarian Gordon and, of course, Crowell. Is that how we're saying that, Crowell or Crowell? Crowell, okay.
Yeah.
And
he goes by E.J.
All right, we're going to go by E.J. then.
Yeah,
we'll call it
E.J. So that's
a lot better.
He does go by E.J. Hey, Alabama's got a great shot there. He is big-time good. This kid is big-time good. And Alabama's got a great shot at him. He's a 27 running back, maybe the top 27 running back in the entire country. I tell you who was on fire is Landon Duckworth. I mean, and we've been talking about him for a long time here, and I don't think, long-time listeners have known. We've actually been talking about him for 2 years here. He was initially committed to South Carolina as a very young high school quarterback, decommitted as soon as he figured out he was going to be a national big-time thing. How about this offer this week for Duckworth? Georgia this week with an offer to Landon Duckworth.
And how about Jimmy? Who he reminds me of? He reminds me of Keelan Russell. He's probably a little more filled out than Keelan Russell, but he's long, kind of lanky, got a big arm, deceptively fast. I saw him in the state championship game. Pretty dead gum accurate. They got some receivers over there at Jackson that are just
helps. Plays on a good team. It's crazy that such a small area, which isn't normally, they're not a traditional in-state power. I mean, they've always been okay. But, man, they just, for whatever reason, something was in the water in the class of 26 and the class of 27.
You got dudes, man.
They just.
I'll take Duckworth right now. If somebody said Duckworth wants to commit, I'd say let's let it go. And I know there's some more highly rated kids that Alabama's after. Was it Jared Curtis, I think?
Yeah.
Some other dudes like that. And I like him a lot, too. Don't get me wrong. But if you told me Landon Duckworth wants to commit to Alabama, the catch being you can't get any of those other guys, I will take it.
Yeah, I think that's something Alabama's probably strongly considering, although I'm sure they would like to get some of these guys and work with them in camp, this summer. They would like to, but Duckworth may get, bum rushed and, hey, if you want a spot here, you got to commit now sort of thing. But he's a very big possibility for Alabama in that he's a 26 guy. Crowell is a 27 guy.
I'm willing to bet he at least will explore reclassifying.
I don't know. I mean,
it makes sense.
Yeah, but classifying is not so much a decision. I mean, there's a lot of work that goes into that. So I don't know how far ahead he would be academically to do that. But it's possible in the sense that he's certainly got the national reputation for it. And a lot of kids want to reclassify because it's 1 year quicker to NIL. Alabama doesn't offer a high school NIL, which is one more reason for, Ryan Williams reclassified. And then that's, to some extent NIL based. But that's why you see so much more reclassification than you used to. It's all a rush to get to your NIL money. So yeah, maybe that's something that's possible. Trent Seaborn is another in-state guy that you hear a lot of rumors about reclassification with.
Gunnar Rivers probably will be.
Yeah, now Gunnar might. Alabama saw him this week. Auburn offered this week. He's the top 27 quarterback in Alabama, just like Landon Duckworth's the top 26 quarterback in Alabama. Both kids train with David Morris in QB country, of course.
I'll tell you something. Alabama as a state better do something about this NIL thing because it's kind of already cost them Caleb Holt.
That's right.
And I was thinking the other day about how, state of Alabama high school basketball, quality-wise, as teams go, probably haven't suffered a ton. As recruiting goes, I don't really even know what's out there for the state of Alabama this year. Caleb Holt was the thing. He was good. And, the thing about Caleb Holt is if somebody else in the state plays well against Caleb Holt, then you start noticing that guy. Well, when you don't have a Caleb Holt, and he's the number 3 guy in the country, and he's gone to Georgia. But that's, again, another podcast for another day. But I'll tell you what we're going to do next. We're going to talk some basketball, and that was a huge win for the Tide last night. Going to tell you about Game Time, though. Download that Game Time app. Use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Now, look, I'm not eligible anymore. I've used Game Time way too much because I love it. And I know I'm getting the best price anyway. So I've done a lot better than save $20 over my time. But you can save $20 with Locked On College, $20 off that first purchase. The app is so easy to use. A Jimmy could use it. I'm telling you, any Jimmy out there can use this app. And it's a lot of fun. You can get to see where you're going to be sitting. I've used it for everything from World Series to college baseball. I'm dead serious. I'm not kidding. Don't think I'm lying to y'all. I'm telling you the truth. I can show you the receipts. Go to Game Time, download that app. Thank me later. Big win last night on the hardwood at number 10 Texas A&M. Now I'm going to say this. Texas A&M was down Wade Taylor. I'm also going to say this. I don't give a rip. That team plays hard. That team gets after you. Buzz Williams is a heck of a coach. They were undefeated in the conference, and that's a big win. Now, my boy Michael Southern, who runs Tide Hoops History on Twitter, we've had him on the show. He sent some fun stats to me. Now, these are not necessarily relegated to just last night, but just some fun stats, and then we'll get into more last night. He said, number 1, Alabama is up to 91.1 points per game, which leads the nation and still best in school history. Alabama should move up number 2 nationally in rebounding at 48.4 rebounds per game, trailing only Florida, who at 48.8. Sears, Holloway, and Youngblood shot 45%, 10 of 22 on threes last night. Holloway is up to almost 40% on his threes. The guy's coming around, y'all. I'm telling you, Holloway played his rear end off last night. Let's see here what else he said. And here's the fun what-if stat. This is just something he added. If the team shot threes and free throws like last year's team, it would average 98 points a game. That's the one bugaboo right now. We're not going to focus on it because we hope it doesn't bite us in the rear end. Free throw shooting, the percentage wasn't awful last night. I thought the timing of some misses was bad. And I know, for instance, like Jaron Stevenson missed 2 in a big spot last night. We got to get that turned around. That's something championship teams do. But overall, not a lot to complain about.
No, it was fantastic to win over a top 10 team on the road. Yes, they're down their best player. Well, Alabama's down Latrell Wrightsell. I mean, we're not going to bring that up all season long, but it is true that Latrell Wrightsell was recruited to be part of this 13-man team, and he's not out there either. But Alabama beat a top 10 team on the road who played really hard. That is the type of game I think that really prepares you for the NCAA. The amount of fouls were ridiculous. The fact that it was a nearly 3-hour game was absurd. because of the 88 free throws, the most free throws taken in any Division I game in 8 years, to show how absurd it was. But at the same time, as they're calling so many fouls to make the game virtually unwatchable, how many foul calls were not made that should have been? I mean, we got hacked, and I'm sure A&M feels the same way, numerous times where there was no call. So it's like, hey, are you calling it close, or are you not calling it at all? Which one is it?
Sears and Phylon in particular got hit in the head twice in different occasions. And again, if they weren't calling everything, I would be like, okay, that's you play an A&M. And just like when we go play Tennessee, let me tell you what, they're going to hit you in the head, the groin, the other
illustrated
perineum.
By when they called the flagrant on Youngblood, and then on the other end of the floor, Jaron Stevenson gets hit, I think extremely similarly. That wasn't called a flagrant, and I'm like, gosh, they even had replay, and I felt they were inconsistent on those calls. But regardless, what a huge win by Alabama on the road against a top 10 team. This Alabama team, we hoped coming into the season this could be a team that could get to the Final Four and win a national championship. And you watch them play last night, and you're like, oh yeah, they could do that. They could really do that.
Yeah, Mark Sears, buddy, somebody has awoken the giant. And I use that term very figuratively because he is not a giant, but he's a big-time player. What he's doing, Jimmy, is getting to the rack again. Yeah. He's finding creative ways to do that. Last night he had a brilliant move and he's got this cool thing where he can go full speed and then almost go into slow motion and like take 2 steps, and he ends up on the other side of the rim. It's not because he's such a great jumper. It's like he's just a tactician with where he takes off. And he ended up with 27 last night. He had some from the logo. And you know, the announcers, who I thought were really kind of bad last night, I really did not enjoy listening to those 2 guys. I'll give them this, though, as a guy who's called a lot of basketball. When you have a basketball game like that, it's not just the team that needs to get in a flow, it's the announcers that need to get in a flow. And the way that game was called, there was no way to have any flow in that game. Jaron Stevenson wins the Hard Hat Award again. I thought he played well. He got some very timely offensive rebounds. Got 3. He got more offensive rebounds than he did defensive rebounds. I'm just looking at the stats right here. Cliff Amore, he got hurt for a minute, and I thought initially, like, oh my God, how weird is this that Janai Broome and Cliff Amore go down in the same day? But Amore comes back, ends up with 10 rebounds, looks good. Overall, just a monster win. Super proud of the team. What a great job they're doing right now. And they got another tough one against an undefeated Ole Miss team tied for first place. And then they travel to Lexington to go play a Kentucky team that just waltzed into Starkville and won last night. It is never ending in this conference. I do still appreciate the irony of you and I talking about how road wins are gold. And every time I turn around, somebody's winning on the road. Bama did, Auburn did, Kentucky did. Who else won on the road? Did anybody else win on the road last night? Oh, Florida did. Florida's good.
They're very good. They play really hard defensively. Florida is a rebounding and defense machine. But yes, so many teams in the SEC are legitimate threats to advance in the NCAA tournament.
Tennessee did. They beat Texas.
Tennessee beat, and it gets to a point, Luke, where this year in March Madness, when an SEC team loses in March Madness, I'll be shocked.
Yeah, I'm with you. They're going through the ringer. A couple other things around the SEC. First of all, Janai Broome is hurt. Don't know how bad it is. And what's kind of weird, South Carolina didn't score again for 5 minutes after his injury, or they could have won that game. And of course, Nick Pringle missed 2 free throws that would have either won or tied the game for South Carolina. And hey, I hate it for Nick because I liked him as a player. I don't know how long Janai Broome's out, but I saw the Onion put something out that said, okay, Janai Broome's out for a few weeks, but did y'all know Cooper Flagg's out for a few weeks because his family had this trip scheduled to Hilton Head that they just can't miss? And that just cracked me up. I don't know why. Cooper Flagg, by the way, 42 points, ACC freshman record. He's unbelievable.
Saw a few minutes of that. I watched 5 minutes and went, he's my number 1 pick. That's a guy I would take first in the NBA draft in this class.
He's ridiculous.
He's that good. He's crazy. If he's just one of these, I'm not comparing him to Larry Bird, but one thing I always think about Larry Bird, it's like Larry Bird didn't throw a ball up in the air that just didn't go in the basket. That's what this kid does. He is just a scorer. Magical in terms of the ball leaves his hand, it's going in a hoop.
I remember very early in his recruitment, Alabama was associated with him for a second, and it took about one highlight for me to go, I don't know if you're up there, but it's me. And if you are up there, Superman. Please bring him to us.
I knew the Superman was coming. Very simple.
That's the Superman. That's the Simpsons joke every time. It gets him every time, Jimmy. All right. That's good. Again, huge win for the basketball team. Super proud of these guys. I'm hoping to make it to Lexington. I don't know if I will, but I want to try to make it happen. So 11
a.m. tip.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's like they made that time just to be inconvenient for me, by the way. The universe hates me. Anyway, that's going to do it for today's podcast. We'll be back tomorrow with more. Until then, roll tide, everybody.
Roll tide.